Sometimes you just need to recharge. Take a little time off, refill your batteries. Maybe it's going to the tavern after a long quest to blow off a bit of steam, spend some of your gold in vicarious celebration. Sometimes you take a few months off of your YouTube channel in order to gather your thoughts and explore new avenues. One thing's for sure, time has this way of turning, continually moving onward, and eventually you might even find yourself back at the Lair of OmnusI.
You have failed me for the last time.
Oh, hi, I'm OmnusI. Welcome to the Lair of OmnusI, round 2. Later. Hello, heroes. I am OmnusI, your host here at my lair. It's been far too long since we've delved into another level here, so I thought that I would take this opportunity since I have plenty to talk about. In this level, we are going to look at something that touches upon my life to a certain extent. My alter ego, Rob, is now playing in a game rather than constantly running as he usually does, so I have to consider the perspective of a player a little bit more. And quite honestly, the position of a player is considerably different in almost all games from that of the game master. A different role with different responsibilities, even if those responsibilities don't seem to be very much, they're there. If you're doing your job right, and if you've served as a game master before, you become even more aware of some of those responsibilities. When those responsibilities aren't fulfilled, you feel it. It's an irritation that can, just gnaw at you while you're playing. So it's important to, as a game master playing in a game, remember the kind of things that you want to see in a player and make sure that you are as good of a player for your game master as you would hope that your players would try to be for you. So this one is kind of a refresher. Now, if you yourself are a player watching this, it's a good idea to reflect periodically and ask yourself, am I being an asset to the group? Am I doing the kind of things that I would like to see if I was running the game? And if the answer to any of those is no, it's something to work on. It's not a failure. I mean, very few people are perfect players going right into every game. Matter of fact, I would dare say that's simply not the case. But we'll be going over all those little details and trends and people's personalities that can, well, sometimes cause conflict and take away from the quality of the game. So, with that being said, I welcome you to this level of the Lair of OmnusI, GMs turn players. Most game masters have a certain player that they idealize as the kind of person they'd want to have in their game. Sometimes that takes the persona of a celebrity or a certain type of person that seems like it would fit the style they're shooting for. Just like many players have particular styles and needs, and we've talked before about players who are hack and slashers who live for the tactical side of the game and combat, the ultimate crucible of their characters' skills and abilities. Players who are problem solvers, who meet a situation and look for the ways to accomplish their character's goals and win ultimately by making sure that those they oppose are defeated or that their cause is elevated to completion, whatever they consider that to be. And the role players, those who just want to get into a role and immerse themselves, to talk as their character, to live in vicarious ways through this avatar of theirs in the world. Not everybody feels those calls in the same measure. Game masters are the same way, though we may not admit it, and some of us like to think that we flow between the different styles evenly. That's simply not true in any case I've ever seen. There are people who absolutely relish the combat side of things to match their wits up against the players. Sometimes that can come off as an adversarial role, and I've certainly played against game masters who take it as game master versus players. This can be exciting for those who like tactical games, but bore the daylights out of a person who really would rather just be role-playing or problem-solving. The game master who presents a world for their players full of challenges to be solved certainly can paint a fun picture for those who enjoy the problem-solving and those who enjoy applying their character and their character's abilities and skills versus a world that constantly provides challenges. And of course, there are some game masters who absolutely love the role-playing side of it. They want to slip into the roles of NPCs and engage the players consistently. But if you're a player who doesn't enjoy that as much, that can seem a bit forced if the game is featuring that style of gameplay. So game masters have their preferences just as much as players do, and they match well. If you find a group that has play styles and preferences similar to your own, that's when the real magic happens. When everybody is having as much fun as they can because the play style is similar to their natural inclinations. Now, it doesn't happen very often, and it's not necessarily a requirement to have a good time. At my own table, I can tell you that different players have different needs and sometimes come to the table with different needs. If they've had a bad day and just want to hack somebody up, that's legitimate. That's a good function of the game, a nice safe way to indulge that desire to just blow off steam. Sometimes they come in and they can't wait to get into their character so that they can solve the problem that's before them. And sometimes they just want to relax in the world and be their character and try to advance their goals. And not a lot of talking as characters in my group, but when it does happen, it's genuine and nice. Especially for longer campaigns where they fit into their characters because they're so familiar with the characters, it's like another facet of their personality, as it so often is. So, game masters should kind of mentally try to inventory their desires, wants, and needs, and come to grips with that. Understand sometimes that if the game master that's before them is running a different style than they're used to, possibly try to appreciate the differences and work on different styles and leanings than that which you most easily fall into. Try to become a more complete player that way. If you're going into a highly tactical game, but you're a very story-driven game master, if for a moment, it may not be your thing completely, but trying to force something into another game master's world can oftentimes lead both sides being frustrated. So when you're a game master, letting up on the controls a little bit is a nice thing to do for the rest of the group. And also, you might find something that you do enjoy to bring into your game a bit more. Also, of course, being a player has its own unique focus that you don't have as a game master. As a game master, you may concentrate on all of the other rules than the classes and skills and abilities and things. You might concentrate on the things you need to run the game. Things like environmental challenges, the dangers of various situations in the world that you would present as challenges to the players. You should have, of course, some passing knowledge of what goes into a character and what they can do, but I'll be honest with you, I don't focus on that. After going through the player's handbook a few times, I often will spend relatively little time on that unless I myself am a player or I'm looking up something that a player is doing that I'm trying to come to grips with. If your focus is not as the player, it can often mean that you take a more wide-ranging approach. Few people can memorize every single rule in a game book, and for a game system as complicated as, well, many of them out there, like Shadowrun or Dungeons and Dragons, that's a lot of rules to try to memorize perfectly. Small details like the ranges of different spells or the actual average hit dice of a particular creature may require you to take some notes and have some things ready. But as a game master, we're often juggling a lot of different notes and a lot of different materials. As a player, you have the luxury of focusing with laser precision on the pertinent aspects to your character. This can be a huge relief to a game master who often feels like they are juggling a lot of details at once, that you can actually sit and drill down and appreciate all of the different advantages that one particular class combination can get for you. This is not a bad thing for your own personal education. Once you really realize what a character can do, sometimes it can really open your eyes, which can make you a better game master yourself. But also, with that kind of a focus comes the ability to, once you're comfortable in that focus, to kind of let go on some of the other details and just focus on looking through the eyes of your character. It's a rare treat for somebody who game masters all the time to be able to do that, and something that a lot of players take for granted who don't game master. But when you are yourself not running a game anymore, relaxing your desire to see through multiple eyes and to approach situations from different angles is, well, it can be a relief for some, but a burden for others. I can tell you from personal experience, sometimes that desire to deal with a situation in a way that's not appropriate for your character because you're used to juggling multiple characters and different viewpoints can be difficult sometimes, especially if you're playing a character with a fairly limited perspective. That kind of a situation is a challenge for your playing skills as well as your role-playing skills. And, quite honestly, that is something that a lot of game masters struggle with and have to work on. Present company included here. A lot of this is going to be autobiographical. I do have a somewhat difficult time in just staying in the character because I'm so used to considering multiple viewpoints as I run games. Trying to get solely into the mindset of my character can be a bit more challenging. Also, if, as I said, your character's viewpoint is limited, and you're used to looking at things from an omniscient view, and all of a sudden you are at a very, very narrow view, say a character with, limited mental resources, or a character with a very strongly flavored bias, sometimes that's a real challenge. But being a good player means being able to, perhaps from a player's standpoint, appreciate all the different things that go on, but then close yourself off to the perspective of that character. Tough to do, but time to time, it's something that you really want to work on as a skill. That includes keeping player knowledge separate from character knowledge, and that is a skill that, quite honestly, veterans even have a hard time with sometimes. That goes under a lot of things like metagame thinking, where you yourself know rules that your character doesn't necessarily take into account when they do things, or making decisions based on external rules and conventions of the game that a real flesh and blood character in that situation wouldn't necessarily do. That especially means not acting on information that you, the player, have heard, but your character was not privy to. That I think most players would agree is not, ideal. Trying to dredge out information to help your character's survival by using that information in a way that, quite honestly, isn't fair to the character or the scenario around them, well, again, it's something that's relatively easy to do, but it's a skill to avoid taking advantage of knowledge that you as a player has. For instance, if you see somebody you're playing a fighter with no skills in magic, and you see a wizard, and you see an effect, your character may have absolutely no idea what that effect was, and it would be somewhat unreasonable to expect that just by default your character would instantly know this character is this level and has this level of power. There may be skills that allow you to get that information, like, say, knowledge of the Arcana skill in Dungeons and Dragons, to say, well, that's a spell of this level, so this means this character is at least this powerful. But as a player, a lot of times we grasp at that information intuitively without considering the character's perspective. And that is a skill that we work on as game masters, who have access to all of the information. Suddenly when we don't, because we're playing a character with a limited perspective, that can be challenging. But it can be done. It can be done quite effectively, and watching a game master who is playing demand that their character not know everything sometimes can be entertaining as well. Also with that, taking advantage of the opportunity as a player to flex your skills and develop new skills can be really, really useful. Again, like I said, the focus is different. So you are not burdened in some of the ways that you are with feeling like you have to know everything, or at least a lot of everything in the game. By being able to drill down, you can increase your knowledge and skill set, especially in terms of what player characters are able to do. Sometimes that can get glossed over when you've been running games for a while, especially if you're like me and you take more of an improvisational role, not worrying about specific details and things like that. Well, if you're playing, you have that kind of time and luxury to be able to do that. I'm not advocating for, getting into complicated builds where you focus with complete attention on one or two details, or an ability that you think is really cool and that you'd like to see. I'm talking about generally learning to live and breathe inside of the skin of that type of a character. And that does include goals, having purposes and goals, but also includes the full gamut of other things, like understanding perspective-wise why a character might do the things they do in a given situation. Because of rules is rarely an acceptable option for a person who just wants to be immersed in the character. It's a lot of times, why would you say have a particular spell memorized? Because tactically it's useful, perhaps, but also trying to figure out why the character would want to get to that point. Again, sometimes as a game master, you don't have the luxury of drilling down into those details when you're painting a wider picture. So, just something to think on as we work towards being better players. Another thing is, this is an especially important discipline if you are very accustomed to being a game master and being the kind of player that you'd want to see. Some people really hate rules lawyers, but as game masters, we're almost perfect for that role. We have passing knowledge of the game. Some people have exacting knowledge of the game. And when someone else is running, it's almost inevitable that there will be mistakes made, or perhaps a rule that isn't followed to the complete letter that perhaps you would. In that case, it's easy for a game master turned player to suddenly just go, wait, that's wrong. This is actually how this works. especially if those kind of rules are ones that imperil or challenge your character in a way that you weren't anticipating. Because you know the rules and you're kind of banking on that. Again, that goes in with metagame thinking too. But that game master comes into the game with their own approach a lot of times. Maybe it's interpretations of rules, and very few game systems are so bolted down that there's no wiggle room for interpretation. Somebody else's interpretation of a particular rule is just as legitimate as yours is when you are sitting behind the screen, so taking that into account can be challenging. Not being the person who will constantly look over the game master's shoulder, figuratively speaking. Literally speaking, you're looking at their notes, and that's not cool. But, figuratively speaking, looking over the game master's shoulder, unless the game master is asking you for advice on how to interpret a rule or how to do something, generally you should try to hold back on all those layers of expertise that you bring to the table as a game master. When you're a player, a lot of times that isn't wanted and can make the game master feel challenged in their authority. You are giving the authority to another person while you are a player and letting them take on that burden themselves. It can be hard to give up that level of control. Believe me, I know. But it's a good thing to practice and work towards, is being just the character and not feeling like you have to contribute to the narrative by helping out the game master with the rules. Unless, of course, you're asked to do so. If the game master is shaky at the rules but just wants to tell the story, well, perhaps you can work something out. But challenging the game master repeatedly because your grasp of the rules may be superior or you have a different spin on the rules generally is something that most game masters are not going to appreciate and makes you less of a player, less desirable to be at that table with the others. This can also be true and applied to the other players. Constantly hounding the other players about details about their characters can be unwelcome and divisive, certainly. If your players that are there around you start to notice that you are, perhaps without your character taking control, but you are dominating the group discussions, and in your position of an authority figure as the game master, you are suddenly taking a completely dominant role as a player, that can be a serious concern. Especially if you're playing a character who should not be the leader of the group. I'm not saying that you can't share your ideas, and I'm not saying that you have to be passive as a game master turned player. But again, you should generally try to embrace a system that is fair and shares the spotlight with everyone. Let the people who want to participate participate. Perhaps there are those who don't participate in the same way or aren't comfortable with the spotlight, and that's fine. You'll find a balance at some point, but it's important to understand that as a player, you have a responsibility to make sure everybody is having fun, just as much as if you were the game master. And if your take on being a player means other people aren't having as much fun, the problem is with you, and something that needs to be worked on and addressed. This is particularly challenging when you're used to doing the majority of the talking at the table as a game master. Stepping back can be hard, but it can also be liberating. Sometimes you start listening to people in different ways. You have to, from your perspective, take what somebody else is saying rather than just hearing the global conversation going on so that you can incorporate it into your world. You can appreciate that when that player is talking to you, even though there's other chatter, you can sit and focus on what that character is saying and not let the other stuff interfere because that's what your character is focusing on. Enjoy that. It's nice to be able to let the other things go, and if something else comes up and your characters were, engaged in discourse and were away from the action, let the other players bring you back up to speed. Yes, I know. It's usually a good idea to listen to what's going on so you don't have to constantly be catching up. But sometimes just enjoy being in the perspective of your character can be a nice change of pace and a liberating experience for somebody who wants to immerse themselves in their character. Now, that's all the fine stuff about being in character and how it's different from being a character, a protagonist in this group storytelling experience or this group tactical challenge. That's well and good. It's great when you can be a great player, but there are some things to really think about in terms of, being a great person who is being a player. And a couple of these I really hope my folks in my group listen to. So, these are things that we can probably all stand to work on a little bit. Number one, getting rid of distractions from the game. A role-playing group is different from most other hobbies. It's kind of a social contract that the participants will get together at an agreed-upon time, make every effort they can to be there because the entertainment of the whole group is diminished when people can't show up, especially if it's part of a serial story that involves multiple players being there time and again. When people can't make it or don't make every effort to, or make themselves available, it kind of dampens the entirety of the experience. The best groups are ones where the people make a commitment to showing up time and again. And yes, life happens and this is all just a game. But, that being said, it is a game that is much better when everybody is there, and hopefully everybody enjoys being there. It's entertaining, it's therapeutic for some of us, so that commitment is not a slight one in a role-playing game. Of course, different groups have their own focuses and frequency that they arrive and things like that, but it is somewhat important if you're going to have a good game that the folks show up. And when they're there, that they are there. If you spend your time on distractions, that is not being present and that is not being fair to the group who have made commitments to be there. So, the modern distractions. Cell phones. Players looking at their cell phones, especially during actions when their character is actually present and doing things, well, that's just kind of insulting to everybody. And yes, I know life happens. Sometimes that conversation that you really need to have will crop up. Sometimes you will get that vital text that you have to immediately respond to. Sure. Especially if you're, say, on call and you're there when you can be, but some other thing also has a demand on your time and attention, certainly. But if you're doing the kind of things that can be avoided, like playing games while the game is going on around you, that is, even if you don't intend it, that is an insult to everybody else at the table, that your thing on your phone is more important than what's going on and paying attention to what's going on in the group. Yes, you may feel like your character isn't an important part of whatever's going on, but you are forcing everybody, number one, to constantly remind you when your things are coming up. You are forcing everybody to reiterate what's happened when your character was there and you should have been present. I can understand if the game master takes a player off for a little conversation off to the side and you really want to get in that turn of the 3 in a row game that you're playing. Okay. That's not hurting anybody, although it would be nice to socialize with the people around you. It's a skill that's rapidly fading these days. And hopefully the people that you're playing with are friends or even new acquaintances. It's, again, kind of a slap in the face when whatever's going on in that little screen of crystal that you're tapping on is more important than the people around you. And yeah, I know, there are groups that whenever the action lightens up, everybody whips out their phone and starts doing that. But isn't that really kind of the sad thing about it? No. So I'm not going to preach or anything, but quite honestly, that is something that many people can work on, is not allowing yourself to be distracted during a game. Another thing is to be cognizant of the things that you do that might irritate or annoy other people. This is something I have had to come to grips with myself. I am as guilty as anybody, and if you think that I'm speaking from a position of authority, no, in a lot of cases this is hard-won experience. My example was when I was a younger man and playing, I felt the need to constantly chime in with humor and puns and movie quotes. I'm surprised my group let me stay, quite honestly. They were good folk and really helped me to get through that. While I can appreciate the ability to break up the group for a moment with a well-timed joke or expression or something like that, people who do that consistently and just have to get in something, just impulsively have to throw things in, well, it's a distraction again. It's you enforcing your will upon the group, especially when it's not timely or appropriate to a particular scenario. It can even come off as passive-aggressive, as it often did when I did it. If my character was knocked out, for example, in a fight, when my turn would run around, I'd make some sort of a pun based on my character just lying there. And it wasn't particularly funny. Every once in a while I would get pity chuckles and things like that, and that satisfied me for a while, but after so long, I just kind of realized it didn't help the game. It didn't make things better, and it was far more satisfying to do something awesome in character and get the whole group excited or to laugh, quite honestly, than it was to constantly be making lame puns and throwing in movie quotes, especially if they're not appropriate. Some groups love that kind of thing. I've been playing with groups that they love the Monty Python quotes or a particular movie or a series of movies, Batman, all kinds. And if you're playing a game like Ghostbusters, the role-playing game, breaking out the Ghostbusters quotes is always going to be appropriate. But letting yourself be a distraction because of needs to do things like that is something that you can address and try to tone down. So, I already talked about giving up the spotlight to other people. It's important. Dominating the game is not a good thing. If you're playing in a game and you feel one person is dominating the game, quite honestly, suffering in silence is rarely the answer. It turns you off from the game and cheapens the experience for you, and it may be cheapening the experience for that other player who wants somebody to play off of. If you just sit there because you feel like your spotlight is consistently being taken away, well, that kind of sucks because you're no longer an equal participant in this game. So, be cognizant if you're that person who likes to take the spotlight and do all the talking. Again, we who are game masters, who are at the table as a player, that can be a constant concern. Just something to be mindful of. Also, when your turn comes up to get the spotlight, a good player is prepared. Not that, you can't be surprised in character, and that's sometimes awesome when that happens, when you can slip out of the metagame and your character can honestly be surprised and you can be surprised along with your character. But the way I'm talking about is when things are happening like combat that rolls in an order. If you are constantly fumbling and don't know what you're doing and you haven't paid attention to what's going on so you know where everyone is and everything is going on, that's a distraction from the game. It makes things get dragged out as you have to be brought up to speed, you have to consider your options, and you go. This is especially important if you're playing a character that has a lot of options. Perhaps you can be forgiven somewhat if you're playing a character with very limited range of options. Although, I would say that as a game master, I challenge those players to think of ways of dealing with situations that aren't always what seems to be in their very narrow set. I'll throw out the example of Rob's character, Galhard. He is a barbarian. He has a great axe. He has a couple of other weapons. He's never hit anything with his great axe. He has grappled, he has thrown himself bodily at people, he has worked to choke down and subdue characters, and occasionally he'll pull out another weapon, sure, but rarely is it, I just move forward and attack. That can be a challenge to a game master, but sometimes a welcome one, entering a little chaos and really flexing how well the world works realistically. Can be a liberating experience and can free you from the I move forward and hit it with my sword. So, if you are ready for what's going on around you, think about how your character will act and be ready to do so, dice in hand or whatever means of resolution that you have, and be prepared to do your job as the player, which is to make your character's decision on what you're going to do next. This also works in social situations. If you say something in character as you're thinking it, and it can come through, as your character would say it, possibly. But if your character is, say, one who's got a lot of very high mental stats or very smooth charisma stats or something like that, thinking about what your character will say in advance and kind of mentally rehearsing it so that when those lines come out, they're not abrupt and blurted. They are something that was considered and comes out smoothly, helps you to stay in character, which is not a bad thing. So preparation is an important thing. Dovetailing into that, and again, I'll speak from Game Master experience here, knowing the rules is very important. It's not necessarily when you're first starting out a game that mistakes will be made. That's almost a given. But if you continue to play session after session and you're continually making the same mistakes, or you are failing to come to grips with what your character can do, that's not a good thing. No, I'm not saying that everybody has to have perfect tactical knowledge of everything their character can do. What I'm saying is you need to learn the rules. And it's not a burden on anybody else to constantly remind you of the rules. You should, after you've had experience in a game, take the effort to crack open the book, read down on what you can do so that when your opportunity comes up, you can be effective as your character would want to be. That sometimes can mean limiting what you do, but more often than not, it'll open up avenues once you realize that your character has a range of abilities and skills and you understand the mechanics on how they work. Even if you have to make yourself notes, guides, cheat sheets, graphs, whatever, so that you can easily access the information. But as a good player, you should know how to do the things that you're going to be doing again and again. If that means understanding the difference between a saving throw, an ability check, and a skill test, and an attack, and how those are different, can make, can save minutes of time that could be better spent towards actually playing the game. So, learn how to play and continue to grow in your knowledge of the game that you're playing, and let each of those experiences bring you closer towards getting a more full understanding of the rules. That's something that everybody can do, game masters and players. But a lot of the times as game masters, we let those individual little specific rules kind of slide a little bit in our understanding of the game. When you become more aware of those as a player and can bring that into your role as a game master, you are a sharper game master as a result. So, that's important. Another thing that is important is gratitude. You understand as a game master turned player what other game masters go through, the preparation that's required, the juggling sometimes that's required of different perspectives, of different characters, of different events that are happening in a scenario, the complexities of running a tactical scenario and considering all of the different playing pieces that move. A player who only has to generally worry about one, maybe two or three characters at a time, can appreciate when 25 characters are brought into the fray and the game master is arranging his small army for you to demolish or run from. Let's face it, sometimes that's appropriate too. These are this gratitude when you understand and appreciate what somebody else is doing, let it be shown. Thank your game master for running games. Tell them when you think something was really awesome. It's important because we have to kind of buoy each other up, support each other, and especially if you usually carry that burden, just learn in gratitude to let somebody else carry that for you. It sometimes can change the way that you enjoy the game, and when you take that mantle back up and you again shoulder those burdens of having to do all of that, um, you know you may feel yourself refreshed and the burden a little lighter because you've had some time where you didn't have to do that and you were able to just play the game with your friends and be awesome for a time. Another thing, which I will definitely recommend to anybody who gets this opportunity, who gets to play in one of these games, or who runs them and then plays them, is just learn to enjoy to play the game. Don't worry about things that are going on outside of the game. Let yourself forget about all that and be a part of the game. If you are in character, your character is already going to have a whole body's worth of concerns and interests that are going on in a moment. But a lot of the times when you're in that character, things can get really simple really quickly. When you're fighting for your life, your character is not worried about, your sick grandmother at home in the castle. You're worried about this ogre who's going to try to take your head off with that club. And sometimes that lack of distraction from other things that are going on is a godsend to those people who really enjoy this hobby. And people who don't get into role-playing games a lot of times don't appreciate that, is that the importance of this world, this fantasy world that you're in at the time, for some people is very important. Not as important as the everyday world of paychecks and papers and cars and scores of children and whatever else. Jobs and other things that are constantly going to be distracting you. At least at the table, try to learn to enjoy that time when you can be someone else without all the other worries that you carry with you, and you can just focus on playing the game and telling a story with your friends, or overcoming a challenge, or righting the wrongs of a world. These are the things that you can do. You can enjoy being the hero that saves the world. You can enjoy being somebody who can make an honest change instead of a society that just wants you to be a cog and just keep moving on till the day that you no longer are. It's one of the things that it's outside of the role-playing hobby. You can't appreciate it. You can sometimes dream of these things when you're watching a movie or reading a book, but when you've actually experienced it, it's why the role-playing game hobby will never truly die. And while there may be challenges and it may evolve, that's what keeps bringing us back to the table. So, I hope this helps. I really do. This has been something I've been thinking about for a while since Rob started playing. And quite honestly, I think that it's healthy as players that we challenge ourselves from time to time to make ourselves better, to make the game around us better, and to, quite honestly, learn to appreciate what we have. Enjoy this time. And you'll never have as much of it as you want. So this time is precious that we spent together, and we play these kind of games. So this is why I give so much of my life to this hobby. So much time thinking about my next game and entertaining the people who are around me. So much time wishing that I could go to conventions and meet new people and hopefully inspire people with the kind of experiences that I want to promote. This is why I spend so much on all of this stuff around me. Because when it comes down to it, I want to enjoy these experiences. I want to keep enjoying them. I want to keep going into these fantasy worlds with my friends and tell fantastic stories and do awesome things. I couldn't ask for anything better, quite honestly. I could be a billionaire on a tropical island, and Universe, I challenge you on this one if you want to see if I'm a liar on this. But even if I had a $1 million computer system with huge screens all around me, there's still going to be a part of me that wishes that I was there with my friends, telling a story and playing a game. So even the more now when there's all these distractions around, sometimes that purity of experience and that escape and that release just can't beat it. So for those of you who are game mastering who never get to play, if you get a chance, try it. Bring things from the game masters that you admire into your game. Work on things that you think might be a little rough. Listen to your players and see what they have to say. But try to be one of them for a little while if you can. And you might see that your experience can change if you let it. And it can be really, really freeing, liberating, unlocking different potentials that you have that you might not have ever considered had you never had a chance to be a player. So, thank you for listening to me. I think you've heard me blather on long enough. You probably deserve some treasure after all of that. Now, I've just said that I sink a lot of my personal resources into my hobby, which is true. I think that that's not uncommon. I think that, if you really love golf, you'll go out and get a really nice golf set and lots of balls and lots of tees and a special umbrella and maybe golfing shoes and golfing pants and golfing shirt. And next thing you know, you've got your own little golfing closet, which is fine. My father used to do that, actually. Never got that far into it, but, I inherited a few things from him. But if you're into the gaming hobby, there's always more games, there's always more cool stuff that comes out, and it can get pretty exhausting pretty quickly trying to keep up on all of the trends. A lot of times, I really appreciate my favorite local gaming store, and one of these days I'll definitely do an episode where I take you to my store and show you what it's like. I think some of you would be fairly jealous, even if you have a big store yourself. It's got a lot of heart and character to it. But sometimes you try to save money by improvising or, finding different ways of accomplishing the same thing. Sometimes it's really hard, though. Those people who make games and game supplements can make it really challenging to better their experience that they offer. And in such a way, as I was running through the current storyline I'm going through, I had an encounter that I knew was coming up that I really wanted to nail the experience for. And while I was thinking about different ways that I could do it, I couldn't help but, in a trip to my store, find an item that was just perfect. And I really couldn't say no to it. The idea was that the characters were going to take on Olhydra, the evil princess of elemental water. And while I have some water elemental miniatures, let's see if I can find. This was the largest one I had. It's good size. It's almost twice as big as your standard character and fairly impressive on its own. It just doesn't quite live up to the gravitas of dealing with an immortal super being such as the Princess of Elemental Water. So as I was going through, I couldn't help but notice Pathfinder had put out this ridiculously huge water elemental that is just called Water Elemental. And for their Kingmaker series, I'm not sure if they actually, with a rather generic brush, approach something on the scale of the Princes of Elemental Evil. But these things are huge, not quite godlike, but massively powerful beings that only care about their element and have absolutely no compunction against destroying anything that isn't of their element. They hate all that which they are not. So I couldn't help myself but bring this beauty into the fold. Yeah. It was quickly quite clear when I put it down that I made the right choice. The players were like, "Oh, this is about to get bad," and again, the figure is excellently sculpted, and it's got a lot of great detail in it. It's going to look great on my shelf after I use it. But after getting it, I suffered a period of buyer's remorse. It's like, I have this. Now, when am I ever going to use this again? There's a certain amount of pragmatism that goes into your spending purchases quite often, and I'd kind of blown my budget a little bit on that. So there was a little bit of buyer's remorse. But like I said, in the experience where I dropped that figure on the table and all the players got to see exactly what they were up against, it felt worth it at the time. But that being said, now that I have it, they didn't beat her. That fight that happened, they were not ready for. So they had to run away. But they'll meet her again. So I'll get at least another use out of her. At least one. But I'll tell you what. I'll make my expensive purchase go a little bit further. You guys can have this icon of the water elemental. Probably shouldn't put old Hydro. Wizards of the Coast might sue me. But you can have this icon of the water elemental. Make sure you note it on your character sheet. If we're ever playing together and you let me know that you've got that, trust me, it's got special powers in commemoration of this story arc that I'm telling with my friends. And it could do something very interesting for you. Or against you. You never know. Some of these items aren't always nice. But I'll tell you, this one's got a nice effect to it. Make sure you write that down. Also, 17 lair points for you today. Moving you closer and closer towards being the perfect personification of an OmnusIan that dwells within all of us and just waits to absorb the wisdom of OmnusI to be unlocked. I can be a little bit arrogant from time to time. It's my YouTube channel. But thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate it, as always. And I hope that next time I come forth to dispense the wisdom from the lair, you are there as well, and we can have this time together again. I have a lot to talk about, and I will make an effort for this new season coming up to make sure that I'm more prolific for you, for those who do enjoy the Lair of OmnusI. Farewell.